Dobro večer svima, hvala na odazivu. Ja zapravo pozdravljam ispred inicijative za Akademiju solidarnosti i epistemičke pravde koja organizira ovaj događaj. Ovo je treći u nizu zapravo tih susreta. Neformalne organizacije koja pokušava dakle, pronaći neki prostor za razgovor i za razmjenu znanja i stavova i mišljenja o trenutnoj situaciji u Gazi u Palestini, ali nekog učenja u povijesti i malo gledanja zapravo izvan ovog našeg uskog okvira u Hrvatskoj. So I just briefly introduce the context, the organization that organized your talk, and I have to say that I'm really thankful for Behzad's positive response to the invitation. This is, as I said, an informal context, and Behzad is currently staying in Zagreb because Zagreb is also a place of his work and his research. This gives me like an introduction to say a few words about Behzad Khosravi Noori. He is basically an artist and researcher. He holds a PhD in artistic research from Konstfack in Sweden. And his work is very much concerned with broad global relations and politics. So one of his recent developments or thinking around these kind of relations you will see in his film after the lecture. I would also like to mention that Behzad is a frequent visitor to Zagreb and a person who for maybe 10 years now has been dealing with topics such as Zagreb School of Film Animation, Brioni Islands. There are people in the audience who collaborated with Behzad, so I somehow also think of him as part of the Zagreb cultural scene at this moment. I would also like to say that the context of this talk and his presentation and the motive for organizing it is not a positive one. It has to do with his research into the relationship between Palestine and Iran, but also is motivated with the recent events and the 12-day war between Israel and Iran. And this will be the basic question. The basic questions of his talk will revolve around these events and how to think of these political context at the present moment. So we will have two parts, or like three parts of the event. The first will be the lecture. Then we will see the film. And in the end, we will have open space for discussion and questions. So,
thank you so much, Sanja. It's I'm very delighted, of course, to be recognized as a person within the cultural scene in Zagreb. So, and it's very much true, of course, yeah. And it has been a long collaboration and investigation, examination, challenges in relation to the history of Yugoslavia, somehow located and concentrated in Croatia and Zagreb in different ways, and is still continuing. So that is the beauty of it, and then of course you wrote in one of my catalog exhibition. Roy wrote in one of reflected, of course, just about another exhibition that I had. So it's quite interesting for me, of course, to be Zagreb, time to time visit Zagreb. Is kind of second home for me, really, and I'm very delighted to be here. Again, thanks for invitation. So the talk is I specify, of course, the way that I'm going to describe my sort of positionality in relation to the subject, to the political condition, to the war, to the genocide, to the claustrophobia that we feel, of course, everybody around the world, majority of us, I believe, and how is it possible to position ourselves within the time and within the world that it seems they had lost their moral compass. And that is, of course, one of the very important things. So my investigation about Palestine in relation to Iran goes back, of course, as an Iranian, always, of course, you have that relationship, partly dichotomical relationship with the question of Palestine in that sense, but trying to make it conscious and historicizing it and positioning yourself. Everything started in 10 years ago, 2015 for me, and the film that after my talk you will see is actually investigation about how I position myself in relation to Palestine, and is still quite a speculative way of thinking about that political positionalities. That is one section, but the other section, of course, is the war, actual war. That always we were thinking that okay, so is not going to happen, because always they're just showing their face to each other, but they're not really actually going to start full war, which again happened because whenever that you think that it doesn't get worse, we have to know that it's going to get worse. So the text that hopefully you had time to read it was basically sort of commissioned to me, literally in the first day of the war, from the platform Post-Colonial Politics. And one of the editors, literally in the first day of war, called me and I said, could you write something for us? And I immediately say yes. However, of course, everything that I was feeling, like vast majority of the people, was a strong hopelessness, anger, frustration, but suddenly I thought that it could actually keep me sane by writing, by reflecting. So the writing is sort of time specific in a way. So that's why at the end I call it 12 plus 3 days of writing, because it was written during the war. Everyday reflection, everyday respond, everyday get back to history, every day looking at yourself, looking at the situation, following the news, looking and listening to Netanyahu, listening to Donald Trump, listening to German politicians, listening to internal politics in Iran, that it was quite silent in that period of time, and it was opening up, of course, the scene for a lot of speculation about what is going on. So I was writing and reflecting in that 12 days, and I relocate myself in my writing in the 3 days after the ceasefire, hence the title, 12 plus 3 days of writing. Mowing the Grass, the Epistemic Violence, and the Enemy of My Enemy. Somehow, of course, maybe the target of this word that I wrote, of course, in English, it means that I'm trying to, maybe unconsciously, of course, based on the kind of request that I received, I was trying to communicate with the reader of post-colonial politics, which I don't know who are they. But you could imagine that when you're writing for a platform that is called Post-Colonial Politics, so you're targeting people that they're coming from the leftist spectrum of political positionality, and they are very much kind of positioning themselves within the school of post-colonial thinking. Somehow, possibly, I was trying to have that conversation with my intellectual friends, with my people that somehow, of course, we positioning ourselves within that left part of the political dichotomy. So that was possibly, of course, my struggle. Partly I was reflecting toward the the sort of part of leftism in Iran, a lot of them, of course, close comrade of me in Iran. Unfortunately, I don't have that opportunity to get back to the country at this particular moment. It has been a decade almost. But of course, just I'm still, my platform in Iran is working. I'm still publishing in Farsi, so I know those people. Suddenly, there was some sort of idea from them came that, okay, so we are actually in the middle of two occupied forces. One of them is Zionist regime, Israel, occupation, committing genocide, and the other one is Islamic Republic of Iran, that they started to use the term epistemologically occupation to define the position that they have in Iran. I can clearly understand that position. But I started to reject that. And I said, okay, there is some distinction here, and we cannot really do that. There is no possibility in that conflictual violence dichotomy to be somebody outside that conflict. You cannot really say that is the conflict, is the war between two equal occupied evil, and I'm out of that. There is no possibility, and historically is wrong, epistemologically is wrong. So somehow I was trying to describe it historically, that there is a distinction, of course, between authoritarian indigenous regime and colonial settler. It's historically completely distinguished. And you have to really work on that, how is it possible to look at it within the word that we could use in order to describe the situations. So my struggle was here, really, to find word to describe the situation. I was trying to communicate, yes, but at the same time, of course, simultaneously, I was trying, of course, to reflect on my own mind. Being very much worried about my family, my mom, who lived in Tehran exactly in that spot. So IDF was publicly as a kind of most humanitarian army in the world. They kind of openly published the target neighborhood in Tehran. I said, okay, so we are going to actually attack this neighborhood and leave that neighborhood. Leave to where first? And we know that story. We know that story from Lebanon. We know that story from Palestine. We know that story from Gaza. We know that story from West Bank, Jerusalem, that it doesn't work. So, and I was looking at that map, and I said, okay, this is actually my childhood neighborhood. I know that there hasn't been any nuclear facilities in that neighborhood. It's a semi-working class, middle class, very much located in the center of Tehran. I know all the alleys because I was a kid. I was at school actually in the kind of like different locations in that particular map. So what is going on really? Why they're attacking here? Have something happened here? Iran started to kind of create nuclear facilities in the heart of Tehran, and now Israel has the obligation to attack? No, bullshit. So, and that frustration, of course, was part of the writing. That how is it possible to reflect upon those propaganda, let's call it. So, in that sense, epistemologically or intellectually, or kind of like when you're looking, I was reading it again, of course, to prepare myself for that talk, and I said, some part of it could be sharper in my argument. And then suddenly you understand that your writing, of course, in that period of time, it could not be sharper than that, because you're not really trying to bring theory in order to legitimize your feeling. Because if you do it, of course, you're mistaken about the notion of theory. So theory is coming, of course, in order to kind of, for me, in that sense, in a very classic Gramscian way, to seize memory in the moment of danger. So somehow, of course, the writing is very much related to that idea in relation to my feeling. As I wrote here in the second paragraph, I felt and still feel, is still continuing, of course, hopeless and disappointed. It's sad, of course, when you say that, because is a pause. Israel going to attack. They are really kind of defining it. And they were saying, of course, 1st of September. They didn't do it in 1st of September, but they're going to do it. There is no other possibility, of course, for them to survive in that condition rather than continuation of that war in a very aggressive way. So I'm still hopeless. I'm still disappointed. The only things that I can do, of course, as a thinker, as an artist, is just really share that idea. That hopelessness, of course, the helplessness is very much related to the idea that, just what should we do? Nothing. When they're kind of, when the plane are coming and bombing the city and Iranian are sending missile there, so there's no kind of idea of a place for negotiation. And that is, of course, somehow, unfortunately, the future that we are going to face, the kind of the rise of fascism, not interpretation of the fascist ideology, but actual definition of encyclopedia definition of fascism. We were talking yesterday with Sanja that who is going to fight against that fascism that is going to happen, of course. And that conversation that somehow, of course, sort of emotional that I'm sharing with you, of course, is some sort of in the intimate, safe place that I believe that we somehow share that some sort of same feeling. I felt and I still feel hopeless and disappointed. The night before ceasefire, Tehran witnessed its most severe attacks in the past 11 days. They took advantage. They said, okay, so it's a ceasefire, so we attack. I'd grown up in Tehran. I'd grown up during the war between Iran and Iraq. And I remember, of course, the missile attack that Iraq was attacking Iran. So it was just kind of memory of my childhood. I even wrote about it in relation to Professor Balthazar. One of the memory of my childhood was Professor Balthazar. The other one was chasing the missile in the sky. But the things that was happening was completely different. It was absolutely different things. And then when you talk after that with a friend that they didn't leave Tehran, you see that, the drone was everywhere. They could hear the plane hovering around. And Iran didn't have any defense mechanism. They lost it. In the third day of the war, there was nothing. And then, of course, it's a kind of like anger started, of course, in that situation, and understand it. Even the news of the ceasefire cannot ease the fear what lies ahead. Is there any cure for the simultaneous weight of sadness, anger, and fear? I should ask my Syrian, Lebanese, Iraqi, and Afghan friends. I'm sure my Palestinian friends are master of this feeling. They must know better than anyone else. Will this become a permanent state of being, a continuous overlap of sorrow and rage, always with profound disappointment? It seems that this is actually the condition. And again, Gramsci, of course, comes into my mind all the time. It's the definition of organic crisis, as the way that Gramsci described. That the old is dying, the new cannot be born. And there's a time of the monsters. One thing that was very, very strange for me, not strange, but again, just when you're witnessing it a lot, again, it makes you angry and questioning yourself again. And the way that you have relationship with the Western modernity in that way is the fictionalization of the reality. So what happened during the war, in the first 2-3 days of the war, Israel started to attack the leader of the militaries. They killed everybody. With that idea, and then immediately Netanyahu gave a speech that is not really about the nuclear facilities of Iran, it's about regime change, it's about liberation. This is a humanitarian war. And then ask people to go to a street and demonstrate and protest against Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime. At the same time, Donald Trump was saying that you have to leave Tehran. And just imagine that, the ironic paradox here, that one of them says going and protest in Iran, the other one is telling you to leave Tehran because they are going to attack. Even IDF was saying that you have to leave. I don't know really how they are kind of managing to think about it. But it reminds me a lot of V for Vendetta. I'm sure that you have seen that film. We celebrated that film as a leftist, just sorry, I'm taking for granted that we are kind of ideologically, of course, kind of standing with some sort of fantasy in a way. That V for Vendetta, what was the strategy that they had as a totalitarian, authoritarian regime? You go there as a hero, kill the leaders, people, it will be uprising, and regime will collapse. And unfortunately, Hollywood make fictionalized reality, and they believe their fiction as a form of reality. And that is the question, of course, for me. That how they somehow internalize their own fantasy. Because the system doesn't work like that. It's not V for Vendetta. Is the kind of sort of regime that has been, of course, operating for 50 years. The complexity of the system is actually quite, and the 50 years they were under sanction is not new for them, that they don't know how, operate under sanction. No, it's kind of, they train, of course, to do and functions, and they have oil. They have access to oil. So, of course, the system doesn't work like that. Immediately they replace, of course, with other people. Everything has started to function again. And of course, they didn't have any defense mechanism, but they could, of course, attack Israel every day. And it was quite ironic, even, just when I was talking to Palestinian friends, they were saying, okay, we knew that when Iranians are attacking. So we were waiting for them. And their experience was quite similar to my experience during my childhood, because everybody, of course, there's an app in Israel that they say that missile is coming. So, and all the Palestinian and Israeli, of course, all of them, they have that app, but the missiles, of course, targeting Israel. But all the Palestinians, they receive those alarms. And Israeli go to shelter, Palestinian go to roof, and look at the scene, that what is going on there. So that is the kind of system or vision or phantasmagoria of the war that was going on. And then, because I couldn't, during that 12 days, I was just sort of reflecting and engaging and investigating my own mind. My writing is sort of fluid, let's say, in a very positive way. But it's kind of like a jumping from one idea to the other idea. And then I couldn't really create it. I even kind of received some comments from editor and said, okay, so it seems that, well, but I take advantage of being artist in those kind of situations. I said, it's a creative writing. Whatever does it mean, really? So there is some sort of jumpiness in that sense, because the anger was, we don't have any defense mechanism in Iran. What happened to all the promises that military and supreme leader and everybody were telling people? They didn't do anything. So they were not just lying to people, they were lying to themselves. Because when I was writing these texts, they were already dead. They were not just kind of manipulating and hiding themselves somewhere. No, they were being targeted and died, one after another. And somehow, of course, it was very strange, because they said they started to say that, Israel is trying to target them through their mobile phone. Well, we don't know. We still don't know what happened, really. But, just the first line of the leaders, they died, of course, in the first 3 days of the war, and then the replacement. The replacement was killed too. And one of them was very strange, because one of the replacement, that it was exactly the time that everybody knows that, okay, so Israel is targeting those leaders, those military leaders. So he wasn't using mobile phone, he wasn't really kind of like a randomly moving, etc., as the way that the news came later on. And he was in the operational room somewhere. Israel targeted that room. They couldn't kill him. He escaped to the safe room. 1 hour after the safe room was targeted, and he was killed. So we don't know really how Mossad started to operate in the society in that sense. So that is the strange, and I'm sure that regime in Iran knows that. So that anger comes, that okay, so you are not just lying to people, you are just lying to everybody, to yourself. And then you sabotage the structural, the society, that any voice that promoting or resisting or activating themselves in relation to social justice were actually labeled as Zionist people or a spy, including myself. So when you have a positional voice, the first things that they label you is you're actually Zionist. And it's very interesting because Netanyahu, of course, immediately took advantage of that. In Farsi, he said, women, freedom, and life. Zan zindagi azadi. He gave a lecture, and in Farsi he said that we are coming actually to liberate you. And he used the name that, well, it's very close to my heart. And a lot of friends that they have been, of course, resisting toward that inequality, gender inequality that happened among the other inequality that is happening in Iran. So certainly, of course, that kind of authoritarian regime is my enemy. But the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. Enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. And that is, of course, radical position. Because it seems that in that kind of political dichotomy, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. If you're criticizing Islamic Republic of Iran, it means you're kind of supporting occupation in Palestine. And if you're supporting Palestine, it means that you're supporting Islamic Republic. Jokingly, I say I'm a pure socialist. I believe in equality. My heart has enough capacity to hate everybody. And please practice that. It's actually very, very emancipatory feeling that, just let's sit and hate all of them. Sometimes hate some of them more than the other, but just we could really discuss about that part. But that is the position. Continuation of that, of course, it was the way that they promoted, defined the war against Iran as a libertarian and humanitarian war. The language is very interesting in that sense, that we are coming to save you from yourself. And that language, of course, is actually historically the language of modern colonial practices. I quoted Napoleon Bonaparte in my text, that in 1798, in the seas of Cairo, Napoleon Bonaparte gave a speech toward people of Cairo, that we are coming to save you from yourself, literally. We are not really occupied force. We are here to give you back your value of your faith, your form of life, so on and so forth. And that speech was, in fact, the point of departure of the modern colonialism. Of course, we are talking about Orientalism, we are talking about Versailles, we are talking about that systematic otherization of the others. But if you look at, of course, for the other project, in a couple of years I was digging British colonial archive in a couple of major archival institution in London, and you cannot really find a word that, oh, we are racist and we hate those brown black people. No, you don't find them. They don't write it. They practice it. So, and that is quite important, of course, to see, and thanks Edward Said, of course, defined that. But how they're working with that idea, I have to, of course, looking at that criticism of post-colonial thinking, the way that Frantz Fanon defined the process of otherization. And that process of otherization is not necessarily administrative framework or military action. It's another form of violence that is happening, and we in university, of course, very much engage and involve in that format, and it's the epistemic violence. And the epistemic violence is certainly equal to the actual violence that is happening as a military operation. So one operate, the other one define. And we have heard, of course, that notion that is very famously said, divide and rule. The other thing that is very interesting, of course, following that notion of divide and rule, is define and rule. If you are the master of word, you could define that idea, epistemology, in the olden days could be published as a peer-reviewed academic article, and it will be part of the definition. Not now. Not now. It's just nobody reads peer-reviewed academic article. It's just a question that why we are still trying to publish our article in the academic peer-reviewed journals, because there was one peer-reviewed academic journal in the field of humanities. I don't remember which was that, but which one was that? But it was looking at the article which was published in that journal in the last 10 years, last decade, and he argues that 95% of the article in that journal was read by the editor and the author, not anybody else. And so, what are we doing really in the university? We are losing actually that notion of communication. We are talking on behalf of the people, but we don't know really. We are not really communicating, and that language, of course, is quite important. But historically, of course, Edward Said has told us that this is not just random thinking about the notion of other. The process of otherization has been institutional framework in the form of depiction, in the form of literature, in form of time-based materials, films, and so on. That idea, of course, that Iran is occupied by Islamic regime, I challenge that. And said there is some foundation of authoritarian regime, and that authoritarian regime is somehow connected to the colonial history, but not necessarily following that. And that is, of course, very important. One of the major paradigms that we have in the contemporary world, in my idea, is that we have three major forces in the world. Two of them, everybody are kind of agreed somehow. The last one is kind of debatable. The first one is patriarchy and misogyny. The second one is colonialism and racism. The third one, which of course they debate and say, oh no, maybe it's good, is capitalism. So these are, of course, three major kind of force in the world, in the contemporary world. The problem that we have is these three forces, which is capitalism, patriarchy, misogynism, racism, and colonialism, are working hand in hand. It's a one body, but the forces is separated. The forces are not really kind of working together. And back to, of course, the fragments that's happening within the left at the moment, of course, especially in Sweden, the country that I live and came from. So you could see that, just that is the problem that we have now, that we cannot really kind of define ourselves within the same body in order to sharpening the resistance from that actual force that we have in front of our faces. I quoted two scholars, Iranian scholars, Asef Bayat and Hamid Dabashi, and both of them, of course, arguing about that notion that when we are talking about we have to find another form of epistemology in order to define what is going on in that region, or those people, or about Iranian politics. So both of them, of course, are very much engaged with the idea that to say, is it possible, as a form of hypothetical intellectual position, to talk about the local authoritarian regime in relation to religious and the interpretation of religious? And that is very important because Khomeini, Ruhollah Khomeini, is one of the very famous supreme leader of revolution in Iran, and everybody, of course, knows Khomeini as a leader of revolution. However, is very much defined, of course, in the idea of history of revolution, but history of revolution in relation to the religion aspects of revolution was not necessarily was forced by Khomeini as a religious leader. Because intellectual, they were not really kind of following him in that sense. There was a guy was called Ali Shariati, and Ali Shariati was the students of Frantz Fanon, one of the major scholars in post-colonial thinking and decolonial practices, and he started to translate Fanon into Farsi. And he was giving actually a lecture in one institution, religious institution in Tehran, Hosseiniye Irshad, and he was a very charismatic person, and he could manage to mobilize actually Muslim revolutionary people by interpreting the idea of Shi'ism as a form of revolutionary idea. And that was his art. Reading Fanon, looking at Shi'ism, defining two sections of Shi'ism, black Shi'ism and red Shi'ism. Black Shi'ism is a corrupted in the history, red Shi'ism is a revolutionary Marxist. And Fanon was Marxist, of course. And then you see that how is it possible to look at the notion of Shi'ism in relation to the revolutionary agency. And he managed, of course, to mobilize people. Suddenly, the new interpretation of the Shia identity was very much elaborated in Iran in relation to idea that, okay, the faith that historically belongs to us could be actually used against the force, colonial force, because they thought Shah is a kind of like he was actually the puppet of first British and then American, so that's the fact, of course. And then you could really create revolution. That interpretation of Shi'ism was very interesting because Fanon knew that one of his students, Ali Shariati, is in fact interpreting decolonial thinking and revolutionary idea of post-colonial global South characteristic into Shia identity in Iran. Recently, I mean almost a couple of years back, there is a book published about the Frantz Fanon letters, that he was sending letters. And one of the letter, he wrote that letter to Ali Shariati, that Ali, I think the interpretation of Shi'ism that you have will result in the bloodshed. So I wrote actually one section that Fanon could start his letter to Ali Shariati, "Dear Ali, you're wrong, I didn't mean that." So that is quite interesting again, that how is it possible to interpret history, of course, or theory in that way. And then on the other hand, of course, that notion of occupation kicks in again. And they said, no, because they are in fact Muslim. And Iran historically was not Islamic country, which is a fact. Because Islam, of course, is kind of from 1,400 years ago, and of course, Iran is one of the oldest countries in the world. It's 5,000, whatever, of course, 1,000 that you want to add into that speculation. So it was one of the oldest country and oldest civilization, and of course, there was something before Islam. So they are not wrong in that historical observation. But the major problem in that sense, of course, is okay. You mean that the things that is happening in 1,400 years, the interpretation, the change, the transformation, the form of civilization, the Islamic thought, everything that happened here is wrong because we were something else 1,400 years ago, and we have to get back to that idea that was, God knows what was that really, because we don't have enough document on that. And then based on that idea, they said, oh no, by the way, because we are not Muslim, we are actually Aryan. And I'm not sure that how much you're familiar with that idea of Persian whiteness. So let me give you a very short history about the Persian whiteness. And monarchs in Iran are very much advocating that idea. So what happened, we didn't know that we are Aryan, by the way, we didn't know. We were just kind of like, in the region, we were there. And then there was a guy, it was called Arthur de Gobineau. Arthur de Gobineau came to Tehran in 1863. And when Arthur de Gobineau came to Tehran in 1833, he was racist. But when we are talking about racist, of course, in that period of time, as a kind of like a state of being, is not a label. He was racist. He wrote actually a book on inequality of the human race. So he was very much believing that, of course, there is no notion of equality, human race inequality. He wrote a thesis, and that thesis was written in Tehran in 1863. And Arthur Gobineau, for the first time, told us, by the way, you're Aryan. You're different from Arab. You're different from Ottoman Turks. You're different.
And then he started to look at the notion of Shiaism as the Aryan identity, compare it with the Protestant identity in Europe. That German, I'm not kidding, is a fact. It's kind of ironic in a way, that German didn't want to be Christian, but they wanted to be Christian, but they didn't want to be Catholic pop Christian. They found something and said, oh, okay, by the way, we are Christian, but we are Protestant. We are Protestant. And he said, exactly Shia identity, because they were claiming the Aryan identity against Sami identity. He defined all the literature, Hazar Ek Shab, Shahnameh, Taziyeh Khani, all of them as a kind of indication of Shia Aryan identity. And then, of course, Nazi, they really like Arthur de Gobineau, despite the fact that he was French. Yeah. And they used, of course, his argument in Nazi ideology. In Nuremberg law in 1935, Iranian were the only Germanic race who received equal right at German race. We could go to Germany and get citizenship during the Third Reich. Such a brilliant time that we live in this. So we could really cross the border going there and they did. A couple of them they did. They went to Germany and became kind of like a member of the Nazi party. They actively publishing, of course, Nazi propaganda in Iran. However, that idea is quite interesting because it has some sort of decolonial tone into that, because of course British, Russia, they were very much, of course, colonial force in region, and again the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Germany was against them, so they could manage that. So that history, of course, is very much internalized form of history or false form of memory that Iranian community they had, and they think that, okay, we are Aryan, we are white, we are displaced nation, our home is somewhere else close to Germany. And by the way, Croats are Aryan too, it's just coming, you know that, yes? You know that. It's very a smart analysis in a way, you know that. It's very a smart analysis. Whoever said that you know who said that, of course. It was very smart that they would try, of course, to get to that kind of white supremacy, but they couldn't really identify themselves with the German Hitler. So, okay, by the way, there is another minority. I think they were reading history, of course, more than us. And so by defining and dividing yourself from the origin of Aryan identity, even according to Third Reich, you claim that notion of superiority of the whiteness in relation to Aryan identity without getting accusation. Yeah? So don't believe that. You're not Aryan. Sorry to kind of breaking, so nothing really. And I don't, maybe we are, but you know, who said that we are superior race or whatever it is? Well, I don't see the sign, of course, at least in myself really. Interestingly, monarch believed that strongly. When monarch believed that when Israel is attacking Iran, according to their political interpretation, Israel is not attacking Iran. Israel is attacking Islamic Republic of Iran. By default, Islamic Republic of Iran is not real Iranian. So in that sense, we are supporting, of course, Liberation Army. During the attack, monarchs were dancing in the center of all the European countries and United States, literally. They were dancing with the Israeli flag in their hand. It was very hard for Iranian, even leftist Iranian in the West, in Sweden that I was, to join pro-Palestinian march. Because for them it was kind of like a little bit problematic. It took 20,000 people being killed by IDF that they understood, the left Iranian understood, no, this is a genocide. It's different. And of course, there's a kind of like a European left that, you know, in the beginning everything was very complex, and then they needed, I jokingly say they needed 15,000 people. They needed more blood to understand that, you know, this is not complex. This is a very clear act of genocide. I started to think about the future, what future could be, and I'm finishing with that future. I used Israeli IDF doctrine that they practice since 2007 in Gaza, and they call it mowing the grass. Mowing the grass was the military doctrine that they use in order to kill time to time certain people in Gaza and just leave back and wait and go and kill again and leave. And they call it mowing the grass. So I started to imagine that mowing the grass will be the future relationship between Israel and Iran. Time to time, Israel is coming and attacking somewhere, killing somebody. And then sometimes you don't know really why they attack that building. And they create a speculation. Because there is a kind of residency area in the absolutely residential neighborhood. And they said, why Israel is attacking there? And then they create a speculation that maybe somebody was living there that we don't know. And you never know. And they continue, of course, that process of destabilization. Simultaneously, the major plan that they have, of course, is very much related to Balkanization of the Middle East. And that process of Balkanization of the Middle East was long, of course, a strategy for the colonial force, but in the recent years, it was the George W. Bush doctrine administration from 2003-4 that they call it blood border. And that blood border, of course, you could see clearly that how it started to kind of create different forces in order to, with the idea of the, again, nationalistic system of thinking, which nationalism by default is the believing in the false memory, the memory that doesn't exist, but you believe in that. This is the major, of course, attempt that I was doing in that writing, in those period of time, that finding the word to describe myself, finding the word to describe the situation. At the same time, of course, simultaneous act of translation is very crucial because I talk to in English. We all understand English. We are the master of the master's language now. We could even write better than them. I was teaching in Karachi in the last 4 years, and my students in Karachi, they could talk English better than my students in the other university in London that I was teaching. And I was telling my British student that my students in Karachi, they speak and write better than you, because they are becoming a master of the master language. And that idea, of course, is question that who we are going to communicate these words and these ideas. But at the same time, of course, these gatherings, these conversations, these listening is the last things that we have at this particular moment in order to create solidarity for the future that we could not really be very hopeful for. Thank you so much.
So now we have some time to discuss, to ask questions. I would also just like to mention that the music...
The composer are here, actually, yes, Pedro and Goldar. Yeah, I think that they did absolutely great. They are very strong, more than me, of course, part of the cultural scene of Croatia, I should say, yes.
Yes, I think we already have some hands in the air.
Thank you so much, Behzad. It's a great pleasure to see you here in Zagreb and to both listen to your words in person and on the film, through the film, in the film. I particularly appreciate your reflections on the challenges and trials of writing in this time of ongoing violence, because I think it's something that all of us can empathize with. I have at least 3 sets of comments, reflections, and questions, but I'll limit myself to 2, since I know there are others. First, a somewhat critical response to the essay 12 plus 3, that's it, right? I'm curious what you make of this. I appreciate the importance of maintaining this distinction between the more imperialist-oriented, in this context clearly Zionist project in the Middle East, and the more sort of indigenous, autochthonous authoritarianism of the Islamic Republic. But I wonder what that looks like from Kermanshah or from Zahedan, right? Rather than from Tehran. If you're in Kurdistan, if you're in Baluchistan, does that really make any sense? And I guess the sort of point of the question is to sort of destabilize what we take for granted when we talk about Iran, especially because Iran, as you know better than anyone in the room, is so subject to caricatures, whether they be sort of Pahlavistic, revivalist, or sort of Islamophobic and/or Islamophobic. So I guess I just wonder sort of if we decenter from the Tehran-focused perspective, what that sort of distinction looks like. Secondly, thinking about the film now, which it was such a pleasure to watch, but also about Brioni, a necromantic theater, which hopefully others in the room have also had a chance to see. There's a way, what I so love about your films, the way in which you sort of call the viewer to inhabit this sort of flow of history in which it's very difficult to sort of take any given moment as sort of final. And there's this sort of open-ended, sort of longue durée kind of affect and sensibility that I think you convey, and here, of course, vis-a-vis the monument. And yet in the writing in 12+3, there is this sense of being thrown in the moment where you can't really think outside of it. So I guess I wondered if you had reflected yourself on the kind of contrast between the sensibility, in some sense, that you convey in the films and some of the arguments or some of the reflections that you make in the essay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, the second part, I will answer the second part, and then we go for more kind of difficult question that you ask in relation to the minorities, or I'm not necessarily kind of maybe interested in that name, of course, but the other decentralized way of thinking about the geography that we were talking about it. In relation to the second comment question, yes, that is a profound distinction, really, and that usually, of course, my writing is very much, of course, related to the speculation form of reading of history, and that the speculation, of course, doesn't have any proper document. I cannot really prove that, because at the end it's very much a form of speculative fabulation. I'm trying to kind of juxtapose different stories close to each other and create some sort of maybe Hegelian dialect in a way. So, but you get some sort of idea about that. And in my writing, of course, I really believe in that practice too. So not necessarily just to say consciously I'm doing, I believe in that there are some kind of aspects that I cannot necessarily clarify myself as a form of manifest in a way. So, and then there is a question mark always in between my writing, or I was using a lot a slash between my writing and or. And I can actually kind of publish a small booklet about the kind of all the editors that they were just asking me, make a decision, what do you want to say? Because I was putting a slash after a slash, and I was playing with that long time ago, but I didn't make my decision, but I made a decision for them to kind of to understand it. But I was in a way that form of writing in the essay that 12+3 was quite new for me in a way. So because, as you mentioned, of course, the political situation forced you to take position. And this is, of course, one of the main criticism that I have in relation to even my PhD, that I criticizing the notion of hyperpolitics. I even invented kind of the term hyperpolitics in order to define that hyperpolitics live based on the dichotomy of political identity, and I reject that. So, but I started to suffer from that form of dichotomy that I was rejecting, even epistemologically, or in relation to argument that I have in the essay. I'm trying to, of course, still theoretically, philosophically, morally, ethically, position myself as a third person, but I can't. I'm harsh in some part of that, and it's a very time-specific writing in a way, and is quite
when I said that I was reading that and I thought that I could change something, it was exactly partly is related to the language that I could use, but of course, you know, in that condition, of course, I couldn't really help myself. I was quite making a statement after a statement, reflecting harshly to Netanyahu, to German Chancellor, when I said that Israel is doing a dirty job for me, is an admission of crime when you say that, you know. And then in that sense, of course, my position was not really artist or historian. My position was the sort of thinker responding to that complexity, let's say. But I agree with you. I agree that is a very interesting, of course, distinction between the field narration and, of course, the embryony. You saw that in that, and of course, you see the kind of the ambiguity in the narration. Always, of course, comes with some sort of melancholia that I really like. Music, of course, was very kind of forcing that idea of melancholia in that sense, and the question that I even ask, of course, you know, how is it possible to position myself in that regard, especially in relation to the territory that you cannot even visit. So that is, you know, as an Iranian, even before the conflict, of course, I was not allowed to enter to occupy Palestine, according to Iran. The first question, it needs more, of course, but I'm going to kind of try to kind of work. I clearly understand the critics in a way, that my point of view suffers from the centralization of the political narration within the let's say Tehran-centric way of looking at it, and what is happening in Kurdistan, what is happening in Baluchistan, what is happening in Azerbaijan, what is happening in Turkmenistan, especially when you're looking at of course the new map of the Middle East, the blood border and balkanization is exactly the territory that we are talking about, it, that they need to kind of receive their own national identity and create a border. There are, of course, distinction between the way that we could talk about it. Yeah, well, I have been living in Zahedan for 7 years, so I was very much, of course, connected to that. And then in the last 4 years, I was living in Karachi, and of course, you know, just having that relationship between Baluch community that they were living in one slum area was called Layari, and I was teaching in that neighborhood known as the Little Baluchistan. Of course, gives me another kind of perspective of what is the notion of decentralization and centralization of my own positionality, as well as the political dichotomy that is happening. In Sarazad, my platform that I'm doing with two brilliant comrades, both of them based in Iran, Shakib, one of them, is from Kurdistan. And we talk, of course, all the time that question, that how much the notion of Kurdistan in that argument could be, of course, relatable with that idea. And the other Kurd people, of course, our Baluch friends. So there are something, they know the danger of that form of balkanization. At least, of course, this is a kind of very, very obvious for them. Kurdistan still wants to kind of attach itself to Iran, because Kurdistan, otherwise it has to be Kurdistan, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria and Iran. And of course, the only region, Kurdistan region, which has oil is North Iraq, and they don't want really that solidarity. So that's the kind of course, is kind of access to the natural sources. Baluchistan, there is a kind of solidarity between Baluch in Pakistan and Baluchistan in Iran. However, there is a kind of system, of course, because Baluchi in Iran, I had a lot of students both in Karachi University and Layari, they identified themselves first Iranian and then Baluch. But when you go to Baluchistan in Iran, based on experience, they identify themselves as Baluch first and then Iranian. So you see that you cannot again homogenize that form of identity. The major challenges, of course, is Azerbaijan in that sense. And then, of course, when you look at it, the notion of centrism, of course, which has started from first Pahlavi, really create a lot of backlashes, because Pahlavi came against Qajar, and Qajar was Turk.
Azeri. And then that idea of the kind of even stigmatization of that group identity was very strong, and it started, of course, from first Pahlavi and continued, of course. Now is little, but they are, of course, even they hold in the football matches. There's a tractor. There's one of the team from Tabriz. They have a slogan 2 years ago that Slovenia, Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia, you decide. So yes, we strongly thinking about it and try, of course, to somehow understand that how much even my argument suffers from centralization.
You have
yes.
another question.
So you mentioned during your speech, there is a Marxist perspective on Shia Islam, especially, which made me kind of realize that I know extremely little about actual Shia Islam, both historically and currently. So, can you explain that sort of what current and historical aspects of Shia Islam could be considered?
Sure.
Way revolutionary.
Yeah, well, very, very short. The Shiaism started with the very quotation from Quran, which says that خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ كُلًّا شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلًا. And شُعُوبًا and قَبَائِلًا means that from different shu'ab means branches, and qaba'il ethnicity. And that is, of course, in Quran. And then there was kind of, when Arab Muslim attacked in that region, Persia, and occupied that, so there was some sort of the inequality in taxation. So the Arab Muslim, of course, forced for the taxation on the other region. Even they were, of course, Muslim. And then they started to refer to Quran and said, okay, we are coming, according to Quran, we are coming from different diverse form of branches and ethnicities, but we are all equal in front of God. So, and they, based on that term Sha'uban, they create Shia, which believes, of course, in the format, in the administrative format, they believe in the leadership, imam, and of course there is kind of like a distinction between them, because partly they believe in the 7 imam or leader, the other part they believe in the 12 imam. So Iran is 12 imam in that sense, and is the largest, of course, group, and that is the major distinction between them. And majority Muslim, Iran is the majority Muslim Shia. North Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan is Muslim. Iraq is partly Shia Muslim. Houthi in Yemen are partly Shia Muslim. Hezbollah in Lebanon is Shia Muslim. So you could see that Iran is creating some sort of Shia identity as a form of proxy, that they call it, of course, among that idea. However, one of them that is completely sabotaged that idea of Shia identity is two things. First, the state of Azerbaijan in the north of Iran, they are Shia, but they are very pro-Israeli. So it's completely different. And Hamas are not Shia, they're Sunni. So, and Iran usually said, okay, no, we are not really following Shia identity, we are kind of supporting any form of resistance, etc., etc. Just hopefully I just, in 2 minutes, managed to describe what happened.
Yes, we have
Kevin, yeah.
To reveal myself as an academic, 2 comments and then a question. So, first comment, it's very interesting with the part you mentioned about Napoleon in his speech in Cairo. This has been used elsewhere, of course. And what came to my mind specifically was the annexation, the Austro-Hungarian annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908, where there were posters with the official proclamation, which was more or less in standard, let's say, Croatian, with one big difference. It started with the opening line referring to 1878, when the occupational army from Croatia, Josip Filipović, came and conquered the area, saying, we did not come as enemies. And the word that Franz Josef used in this was actually a loan word from Farsi, dushman. We did not come as dushman instead of the more standard neprit, or unfriendly. So That's the first point. Second, I know we've had conversations in the past about this, about various apocalyptic visions and eschatology from different groups. And one of them that came to mind when I was reading your piece was, I think it's one of these Protestant groups, Seventh-day Adventists maybe, where they imagine this final battle between good and evil in a less naive way than I would expect, where, you know, they don't see people rushing to join evil, especially when, you know, Imam Mahdi has come back, or, you know, Jesus, and, you know, who would do that? Instead, they see it as a battle where evil is fighting evil and good people taking sides. And this is the way that good people go towards evil. When there is this clash and people are willing to step up and stand up for something that they recognize as evil. So I thought this was
that's very interesting to me. Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Dovetail with that. In terms of question, actually two little ones. There's a large poster on Palestine Square, and I think I caught the first word Shahid. Like, was it,
the poster that on the what was his name? I will tell you who is. I don't. Yes.
Okay, and then the second part was actually with. I'm curious if you could tell me a bit more about the relation of Iran before the revolution with Palestine. In some of my own recent work, I found that the UN partition plan, which was 11 different countries, there were 3 countries in this group, Iran, India, and Yugoslavia,
they said no.
Who came out with a plan against partition.
Yeah.
So it maybe you could share something.
Regarding the poster, what was the name? Golnar, do you remember the poster, the guy? He's Lebanese, and he's one of the very predominant known anti-Israel Rouhani leader, spiritual leader. And he was traveling between Iran, Sadr, Abul Hassan Sadr. And he vanished. He vanished. Of course, he was killed by Israelis, and that became a kind of like a myth around him, that who is he, where is he, and kind of reclaiming his existence. So he's a kind of like a mythical Shia figure in a way. It was, but now nobody really talk about him. And then, of course, putting the poster in one of the footage, because it was a little bit older footages, because there's 2 types of footages. One of them is coming from 2009-10, that there's a poster, and the new footages was from 2015. There's a sign of the poster there, but they took the poster away. So is that guy? So is a Shia, which is related to Palestine, of course. Yes, in relation to UN scope 1947 to 1948, a very short story. What happened is a very important point, of course, in relation to that idea that monarch or pre-Islamic republic, they were very much, of course, pro-Israeli, which is historically completely false. The British Raj, Britain, of course, after Second World War was very, very weak. They wanted to get rid of all the unimportant colony. One of them was Mandate of Palestine, and they really didn't want to keep it because they were being attacked by Zionist terrorists, as the way that they define it, because they were very much attacking them in the Mandate of Palestine. After Second World War, Britain gave the responsibility of the Mandate of Palestine to the newly formed UN and said, okay, whatever decision that you made about the Mandate of Palestine, I will follow. I don't care. UN creates assembly, including, if I'm not mistaken, 13 or 14 countries. There was one condition that if you want to be part of that group making a decision of the future of Palestine, you should not get any benefit out of. You should not be part of the conflict or anything. So there was any Arab countries there. There wasn't any power. Soviet Union, United States, Britain. They were not part of that. So they were mainly Latin American countries, and they were very much, of course, thinking about Jerusalem. That was the main idea that they had. They wanted to have Jerusalem as an international zone to go and visit the birthplace of Jesus. That was the main things that they were thinking about. And then in European countries, there were the Netherlands, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Sweden. These was the four. And from Middle East, the only country was Iran. From South Asia was India. So this was the kind of assembly. And they were kind of, for a couple of months, they were going and visiting Israel, Palestinian. They boycott the idea and said, okay, these are land, we don't want to share. They didn't really have any conversation with them. Zionist, Israeli, they were very accommodating them. They were showing, of course, the progress that they have, the industrial farming that they have. They were showing, if you give us that land, we are really taking care of them. We are a modern nation. And then there was a division in that within that group. There was a minority-majority group. Majority group, they were going for partition, independent state of Israel, independent Israel, Palestine. Minority group, there were three countries: India, Yugoslavia, and Iran. They said no, a state of Palestine, it should be federation. You should not create partition there. And it's quite interesting because the majority group was led by Sweden. Majority group was led by Sweden, and minority group was led by Iran. And the politician who was leading Iranian delegate, he, after the partition and after the partition and UN voted for partition, he gave a speech, and that speech, of course, is part of the document in UN, and I'm quoting, of course, UN document in all the kind of story that I'm telling you. He said that the independency and recognition of Israel create permanent bloodshed in the Middle East. He said that, and he was representative of the Pahlavi monarchy. So this is, of course, one thing. Interestingly, they decided of partition, but they wanted to visualize, of course, the proposal to UN, and they asked. He wasn't a politician, but he was kind of administrative or a civil servant. Paul Mohn. Paul Mohn was a Swedish guy who received the commission to draw the map of partition. So the person who actually created that mess from the page was the Swedish administrative guy, who drew actually and give 66% of the land, the kind of better farm and everything to Israel, and 44% without consider the population and density of the population to Palestine. And immediately, of course, UN accepted that. And I found actually his diary in Uppsala University, and he wrote, "They left me in the darkness of my room to draw the map of the partition." So it's actually quite interesting, the banality of evil. Hashtag Anna Arendt. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And then, of course, the first wife of Mohammad Reza Shah was Fouzieh. Fouzieh was Egyptian prince. So it wasn't kind of Israeli prince. It was because they wanted to have a kind of close relationship to Egypt. And Egypt was very much clearly anti-Israel and anti. So that idea that monarch, of course, just before revolution, everything was pro-Palestinian is completely historically false. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. It's a very important fact, actually.
Okay. I will just to briefly want to go back to the film itself and the motive, surprisingly, of monument that interests me. So I was thinking, obviously, and we had some conversations about this, how you're basically mobilizing this statue through your film. It's the kind of centerpiece through which you think and what enables this kind of story that evolves around about. And I was just wondering maybe that you can kind of tell to the audience more about your relationship to that monument and in which ways, because at some point you mentioned in your narration that it is at the same time some kind of mark of a still an ideal, but at the same time marking the reversal. So it is this kind of dialectic image that is still there. But I'm wondering how when you reflect now after the recent 3 years of genocide in Palestine, in Gaza, how do you relate to coming back to your work, coming back to this monument, or thinking about? I mean, you cannot come back to it. This is another story, but just to kind of reflect on this.
You're referring to basically the last part of the narration of the film. That, the idea of reversal, of course, are kind of playing with the idea that it's upside down map, and he wasn't even conscious that the map is upside down. So, and then it would be very easy, of course, to mock Islamic Republic of Iran, that even they are celebrating the Intifada and the monument to the Palestinian people, but the map of Palestine is upside down, and they are not really conscious about that change, really. But on the other hand, of course, I took it as a kind of like a metaphor in a way, and the reversal, of course, referring to that reversal in that sense, and also the idea of the international solidarity, which was very much in the beginning of revolution, and that the notion of international solidarity vanished, of course, after the first year of the revolution. All the kind of the people in the document, in the archive that I show, they were either ended up in jail, or one of them, Fruhar, was brutally murdered almost 15 years after, with his wife, and that is, of course, the kind of idea that we lost, of course, that revolutionary moment. The same people that, of course, were very much engaged with the idea of Palestine inviting Yasser Arafat, they were those who were very much forcing the idea of Iran joining non-aligned movement. So they had a very clear idea about the international solidarity. They had a very idea about the global South solidarity, and they were all following Mohammad Mossadegh, who was, of course, the leader of the independency of the oil industry against British petroleum in Iran in 1951, which was ended up in 1953 CIA coup in Iran. So all of them, they were very much engaged with that idea. Interestingly, of course, that when non-aligned movement happened, and it's very interesting, it's kind of referring to the other lecture that I gave in Zagreb about the history of non-aligned movement and in relation to Iran. Those people that they knew what they are doing, they were trying, of course, to create. You could criticize them, of course, but they were very much, of course, engaged with the idea of revolutionary idea and solidarity of global South. And some of them, they were translating Fanon. They were very much reading, of course, even theory in relation to those ideas of decolonization. They were nobody. So Iran joined non-aligned movement in 1979 in Havana summit, and then the next summit was 1983 in Baghdad, which Hotel al-Rashid and the other film that I made, of course, about Layla al-Attar, of course, is kind of Iranian attack, and they didn't let non-aligned movement summit took place in Hotel al-Rashid in Baghdad, and changed, of course, the place to Delhi in that period of time. The group that they went there to Delhi, based on the documents, they didn't even know what are they doing there. They didn't have any idea about non-aligned movement. They thought that we have to go there and kind of present Iran as a revolutionary force, or kind of like during the war against Iraq. So that idea of revolutionary idea and the solidarity of the global South and decolonial practices vanished, of course, very much in the beginning of revolution. Simultaneously, of course, the massive execution and imprisonment of all the leftists, and majority of the kind of families, of course, they have some sort of history, of course, in that regard. So that part, referring to that part. You could see, of course, the position of Iran as a very pro-Palestinian. And, of course, when you're looking at the global left, of course, everybody's celebrating Iranian, attack and or kind of defense or kind of continuing that aggression. So you have to really give it to them that they didn't just talk about it. Of course, they practiced that. They managed to materialize that. But on the other hand, of course, the relationship with the Palestine and Palestinian is absolutely distance relationship. Just Iranian don't have any relationship to Palestine and Palestinian. Palestinian don't have any relationship with Iranian. There is the completely distinct territory. So, but of course, Iranian is supporting Palestinian, or kind of the idea of resistance is there. You have to, of course, you could celebrate that. But you see that, just it's not really direct. It's a very different relationship to Lebanon. The film started with the Museum of Resistance in South Lebanon. That in 2017 I visited that place. It was the Historical Materialist Conference in Beirut, American University of Beirut, and I went there and I wanted to go to south of Lebanon just because it was the closest place to Palestine. I could see actually from the top of the hill Palestine, and it was cloudy and rainy. I couldn't see the place. So the whole narration of the film started with that. That relationship is different. Yeah, there is a kind of relationship. The question again with the Lebanon is, again, that relationship is very much kind of governmental or power relationship. Just a few Iranian, they go to Beirut to study, or that relationship doesn't exist. The same kind of relationship with Russia. You think that Iran and Russia are very allied, but Iranian and Russian are not really, is colonized basically the form of relationship. I was one of the few Iranian in Russia when I was working there, and but it was completely different things. And it's kind of necessity of it. The relationship between Iran and Pakistan is the same. Just Pakistan is kind of fully supporting Iran. But how many of Iranian are over in Pakistan? I was the only Iranian in Pakistan teaching in the university. And that is a very important thing to see that, just that relationship, we just kind of, as a kind of leftist intellectual, we just gave up of those kind of neighboring country, whatever it is. They're kind of like, they have a common history, tradition. The national anthem of Pakistan is in Farsi. So it's just in that close relationship that exists. But of course, Iranian thinks that they're Aryan, possibly. Of course, why should we go to Karachi? No, I'm serious, really. Just when I was decided to go to Karachi and teach in Pakistan, a lot of friends, they said, "Oh, why you're going there?" So I have been for years living in Sweden, in Stockholm, 6,000 miles far from Iran. Nobody asked me why you're there. Have you looked at the map? It's just there. I'm coming back, really. Yeah, but this is a kind of like a distance is actually the state of mind.
So basically what you're saying also is like, now you were describing this particular form of friendship. You started your conversation, your talk with the relationship between enemy of my enemy is not my friend, but now you're basically speaking about what is this form of friendship that goes beyond the dichotomy.
Yes.
Like what you were saying, like alliances between the countries that are also part of the geopolitical play.
It has to be, really. Just I have very common language talking to Russian friends. Because they kind of, we understand each other based on the political situation. Well, in Croatia, of course, we can understand each other in somehow. Just that kind of political identity based on the collective past or similarities that we have, or kind of common shared memory that we have. We all grown up with Professor Balthazar, for example. Just why not? Why not really stand on that and say, okay, we know each other because we've grown up with Professor Balthazar. So why not really? We can stand on that.
What about the Swedish?
Well, just I was trying to say, okay, you grown up with Professor Balthazar, come on, you could do better. So it was my response to them, yes. Yes.
Is there another question?
So I'm interested, I feel as if the beginning of the film and the end are connected. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is the question. So I feel as if you were watching Palestine, or trying to see Palestine from a position in Lebanon, but actually couldn't see it, at least in the movie. And then at the end of the film, you asked a very interesting question, which I cannot quote, but I was very interested. I was like, can I be fast enough to write it? But I didn't. Something about territory.
How can I visit? How can I practice the territory that you cannot visit?
Yes, and And I'm so interested, what does it mean, practice a territory that, how does it connect with it?
Despite the poetical language that, of course, opens up for any interpretation, the practice, of course, could be any form of material relationship to the place. Basic friendship. Eating a food. Walking in the street. Very basic. How is it possible to practice the place? How to observe that? How to sit and breathe in that place? Very basic. When I say practice, their practice is not really kind of going and doing something. No, just how to be in that place, in that geography. That you cannot do that. Yeah, I'm just bringing back to a square in that sense. Which has some sort of...
I was also in that place in Lebanon, and it was summer, so I could see...
You could see the militia, yeah.
But what was interesting is that my family told me, this is Israel, and we are the closest we can be to the Israeli soldier.
Yeah.
And we were like, we can do whatever from here, but if there are 10 kilometers within the Lebanese territory that we cannot actually go, because they can shoot us. So it was very interesting because I was thinking, and it was very long time ago, and I really didn't know much about Palestine at that time. So I was thinking, how is it that Israel is so green, because it was green, and Lebanon is like, it is Mediterranean, it is really like, if you go to the coast in Croatia, it's the same in summer. So it was very funny to see in your video that Lebanon is green.
It was very green, actually.
Yeah,
that part is very green.
So
Yeah.
I was like, yes.
That Melita, that village is very famous for its roses and flowers. So they have a very tradition of making soap out of those flowers.
But I think I understand this longing for to visit a territory, but also having all this like, how do you not just imagine or make it a myth of going to Palestine, but also actually just simply practice like connecting to Palestine.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So just maybe the last question would be, when will your film end? There was another mistake that you allowed me to make in the announcement, was that the film had this beginning and the end, 2000s, I don't know, 15, 17, 21.
Yeah.
But in the last iteration of it, you wrote 2015 to an open future.
Yeah.
What does it depend on? Where, or would you?
Well, I'm still not very happy with the sound, so I have to work on it. Sometimes it's kind of, it's so kind of, sometimes of course is a form of procrastination, and that procrastination, of course, in some of my work, of course, cannot really kind of, I don't know, I'm procrastinating to finish it really. I cannot really put the kind of time. So, okay, I'm done with that. This is a film that could be disseminated now, and I'm always thinking, oh no. I was thinking that maybe I have to change the final part and put more questions into that. I'm not going to do that because, of course, the narration was written. Yeah, and then my position, of course, will not change because it's a very conscious decision where I'm standing. But the argument and the form of storytelling could be, of course, different. Yeah, all the times. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.